There we go. Have our folks come in out of the waiting room. Welcome, everyone. This is a special session that we're running here, so thank you for joining us. With everything going on with the H-2A program, we thought it was definitely a good time to bring somebody from the inside, just to give us a little inside information into what is it that Wage and Hour actually looks for on a farm? What is it that you can do on your farm as far as best practices, things to be mindful of, not only before an audit, but during an audit and even afterwards. So I definitely wanted to thank our panelists here today. We have Ashley Reese, account executive here at FieldClock, and we've invited in Warren Williams, who was a former senior DOL wage and hour investigator. And Warren, I want to move over to this one here because in addition to providing the information today for us, you also provide what you consider a compliance assessment and action plan. And just wanted to give you a minute to kind of run through and tell us what that's about.
Thanks, Nico. Thanks, Ashley. I really appreciate you all allowing me to have this opportunity to speak to everybody and hopefully provide some great information that everybody can use that will help them to benefit their farms and their operations and going forward. So, just real quickly, I did 23 years of wage and hour, and one thing I noticed before I left was that small business, big business, there was a need for a little bit more compliance assistance and trying to make sure that everybody knew exactly what was going on with the regulations and so forth that wage and hour enforced. And I just thought it was a lot of people don't have access to a true HR or those departments and such attached to their farming operations. You might be one or two deep and you're doing all the work. So at the end, I retired and I said, well, I'm going to start doing some consulting work. And what I did was I came up with my signature statement, and I call it the Compliance Assessment Action Plan. Shortly, it's just called CAP. And what we do, I've teamed up with some people, H2 Visa Solutions and Roofs Accounting, bookkeeping. And what we do at first is like a step process. We try to get your payroll taken care of. We get at least 2 to 3 years of payroll. Make sure your payroll is audit ready, and make sure everything is in complete that you would have to present to an investigator if you need be. And that's also, they can help you out with your taxes if you need that information also. One thing we found, and from my experience, is that sometimes the wrong people get taxed when you're doing your payroll, and that can be taxing H-2A workers, foreign H-2A workers when they come to do work on your farm, and that can be an issue for you. The next step of it is we have you do what's called an assessment review, and it's just some questions that I used when I was a previous investigator. And we made an assessment document that we want you to complete. It's going to extract some information from you so we can go through this particular assessment to see where there may be any kind of compliance gaps. We try to share best practices with you and provide resources to ensure that you're in compliance. That's something that I do, and it's usually it can be 1.5 hours, maybe 2 hours, and so forth. We try to get that taken care of. Just as a caveat, we do this on a virtual type basis. That helps for folks I'm in Georgia, so it helps to help you out if you're not in this particular area and go from there. Now, it can be on site because there's a housing and transportation component of the assessment. And thirdly, we also work with Wendell Hall Global, and that is to ensure that all the steps in 1 and 2 is to prepare you to be properly defended if he has to defend you in a legal action that you may have with wage and hour. So altogether, we call this WHD Audit 360. So we try to make sure you're covered from all angles, all sides, and everything that we could try to do to help you to be compliant. And rest assured, so just in case you get a knock at the door, we can educate you, we can empower you, and have your attorney ready so it can reduce your risk. So I'm glad to try to help you do that, and I'm glad to be here today. Thanks, Nico.
No, we definitely appreciate your time. And like you mentioned, 90 minutes, 2 hours. Today we have about 30 to 40 minutes. So we're going to be covering some of the best practices. But if you do have more in-depth questions for Warren, please feel free and use the Q&A button below. We want this to be an interactive conversation, so we're here to answer live questions. And if it goes very deep into the weeds with your specific farm, we're going to provide some contact information specifically for Warren, so you can reach out directly and get some inside information that relates directly to your business. One of the questions that we get a lot here is, are you recording this? And yes, we absolutely are. We know that farmers are busy, so if you do need to jump off a little bit early, we are going to send a recording of this entire production. So before we get into our Q&A, I just kind of wanted to set the stage with how important the H-2A program is to farmers. And when you look at the national scale, yes, we have the top three. You look at California, Florida, Washington, even Georgia, high concentrations of H-2A workers. But the American Immigration Council did a study looking at 5 years. And if you look at this chart on the right, this is a growing issue. If you see hotspots like Texas and Michigan, even to a higher degree, starting in some of the inland states, this is not going away. In fact, it's just getting more and more intensified. And when you look at the wages that are being paid for H-2A, the AWR wages, Farm Bureau did a study as well showing the increase over time, just looking at the last 2 decades, also not going down. We're looking at about a 6% roughly increase every year for these annual wages. And if you're thinking, well, that's probably a large farm issue, not necessarily. If you look at over 2/3 of the H-2A petitions request fewer than 10 workers. So this is very much a small farm and a large farm problem. And it's something that we want all of our clients to be mindful of, and all of the farmers out there that are not working with FieldClock yet. Everybody needs to make sure that H-2A is top of mind. And if you're going to use this program, make sure that you're using it correctly. And if you're in compliance, which most farmers are, make sure that you're able to prove that. And that's one of the things that we're going to be discussing with Warren today. It's not enough just to be in compliance. You've got to prove it, because you don't know when wage and hour is going to show up knocking on your door. We've talked before on previous webinars about the challenges with H-2A. We just mentioned wage increases. Warren mentioned housing and travel. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces to this program. And that's just once you're in it. When you're looking at getting the approval process, there's a lot of regulation, a lot of bureaucracy to jump through. Not to mention the language barriers. There's a communication breakdown often between crew bosses and employees. So how can you shore that up? We're going to be talking about that as well today. The main thing, especially when you're talking about what FieldClock offers, is getting your records accurate. And we put that quote on the side there about how employers must keep accurate records, not only the number of hours worked, but the number of hours offered. And I put a few different bullet points, just high level, looking at what farmers need to consider when they're paying their employees. There's a lot of different wage types, from hourly to piece rate to bonuses to break times. You look at the 3/4 guarantee for hours worked. And if you're on this webinar, you're probably already apprised of what a lot of these regulations are. But how do you actually prove those regulations, and what happens if you're not able to prove them? That's what we're really going to dive into today. And we did a webinar last month with ag replacements, and we used this slide here specifically just to show that most of the violations, 42% actually, are pay related. And that goes right back to how you're keeping the records of how you're paying your employees, where they were when they did a job, what specific job were they doing. And we have a quick little blurb here from 2018 through 2023. 39% of those investigations found that there were other violations. And it goes into exactly how many layers wage and hours starts to peel back when they're looking at your business. So I guess let's start there. With our first question, I'm going to take our slides off so everybody can see here. Let's just go right into, there it is. Where does that non-compliance tend to occur? Warren, you mentioned 23 years you worked for wage and hour. Where was most of that non-compliance coming from?
It's a mixture in the way you do the investigations with wage and hour. So, um, and we want to make a point that I want everybody to understand that when you get a notification or somebody comes to your farm to investigate you, please understand it's not just a H-2A compliance investigation. Um, it's also going to have components of the Migrant Seasonal Worker Protection Act. It's going to have the Fair Labor Standards Act, and you're going to have OSHA also involved. So, and you may hear me refer to the Migrant Seasonal Protection Act as MISPA, and then Fair Labor Standards Act as FLSA, just so you understand those components of it. So, what happened from the last slide is that even though you're doing H-2A, you still have to be in compliance with those other three components. And that also includes other things as far as state and local ordinances that are applied to that. So you're not just looking at doing H-2A. So it's 4 or 5 different laws that maybe that you're going to have investigations. So I know there's a lot of changes that come out all the time. You have different changes with different administrations, but most of the time the enforcement is still pretty much the same. The current, if we look at things, is if it's 75% violations in such areas like your record keeping, your payroll, housing, inbound, outbound, transportation reimbursements, looking at your vehicles, make sure you have proper U.S. worker recruitment, and your postings. Make sure you have that poster or posters that you need to have in your particular business. So you would want to probably try to avoid at best you can anyway, not being caught in I call them the multiply violations.
Yeah, explain that concept a little bit.
So when you do an investigation that you may have all those acts that are in play, like again, once again, H-2A, Migrant Season Protection Act, Fair Labor Standards Act, and you're going to have OSHA, and you might have some other state and local ordinances that come into play. And let's not forget child labor. All those things are looked at when you're in this particular violation in the investigation. So if you have H-2A requires you to be compliant with the other 4, the child labor, Fair Labor Standards Act, OSHA. So you could get a violation just because you're not in compliance with those other laws under H-2A. And then you look at, did those violations and those particular laws cause any other violations within H-2A? So just to look at some of the multipliers, anytime you have any kind of payroll violations, those could be multipliers because there's steps they're going to be taking to see if the facts line up, then you could be charged per worker or per requirement. So you have to be real aware of those. There are over 45 violations, as stated in the previous webinar that FieldClock did. 45 violations with the H-2A program, and that's just H-2A. There are 29 with the Migrant Season Protection Act, and then you have others with OSHA and also with the Fair Labor Standards Act with minimum wage, overtime, child labor, and so forth. So anything dealing with your payroll, anything dealing possibly with your housing, and also with your vehicles, those could be multipliers, meaning that you could be subject to a civil money penalty for numerous violations or numerous employees involved with a violation. So you just want to be very careful in those particular situations, particularly in the wage situations and recruitment and so forth.
So having, a complaint or a report and an inspector coming to your farm really could create this waterfall effect of violations that they can open themselves up to.
That's correct. That's correct. So, and it's not you may have something that comes up and it's a complaint. Somebody called, they made a complaint, and then you're setting yourself up for a real live investigation. So it's not just somebody's going to call you and say, hey, you didn't pay somebody $100. It's not going to happen like that. So it's going to be a full investigation. So you have to make sure you're in compliance with all of those laws, so you don't have any multiple violations or, as we said, multiplier violations within the H-2A.
So now, what triggers the Department of Labor to investigate?
Well, we got a couple factors that are looked at. Every year I worked in wage and hour, we did what we called we did ag investigations. And as H-2A has progressed, it kind of started out mostly when I first started working with the Micro Season Protection Act. You didn't really hear a lot about H-2A. Then H-2A started to develop, I'm gonna say really around 2010, 8, 10, somewhere around that time frame. And you started seeing more and more people using H-2A program. And they all come with certain regulatory requirements that you have to take care of and make sure that you're in compliance with. We would do initiatives. An initiative is basically a planned strike force that you may send people to one particular area, or it may be spread out over a certain location. And then you would go out and do ag work in those particular areas to see who's in compliance and go from there. That was done pretty much every year. That's not all offices do agriculture, but I'm in the Southeast. I was in the Southeast, and the Southeast does majority, I won't say all of it, but quite a bit of agriculture work is done within the Southeast. Then you would have got your complaints, and somebody might complain that something's happening. Anybody could complain. The worker could complain. Somebody else down the street could complain on you. Some other agency could complain. You might get a referral. Those things can cause a complaint and cause wage and hour to come to your location. If you have a lot of violations from previous investigations, that could also be a clue. It's referred to as recidivism, and that can also be a reason for wage and hour to come out in certain areas and do those types of investigations. Now, one of the last two is media, and one thing you have to understand is that I learned something from my previous experience when I was in the military. They called it you were Mr. Big Ears. So you're always listening, you're always watching, and then I might get a blurb across my phone that say, hey, they had an accident in one of the cities around me. So you start looking into that information to see exactly what happened. You might hear there were 15, 16 workers on a vehicle that flipped over on a road and workers were hurt and so forth. You really have to pay attention to that part of it, because one thing I know for sure is that workers are either coming from somewhere or they're going somewhere. And you have that many workers in a van or a truck or a bus, then something's going on with that particular situation. And you have to try to dig into it a little bit more. You might call the police, the sheriff department, state patrol, and find out who was involved in the accident. And that can trigger that type of investigation, because it could be a farmer's bus, it could be a farm labor contractor bus, and that could come to a point where you may be involved with that particular accident. Because even if you're using a contractor, that does not exclude you from what could be an investigation, because the workers are not. I never met a contractor that had a farm, so the workers are either, like I said, coming from a farm or going to a farm. So, and my last part of that will be, if you hire a farm labor contractor to come and work on your particular property, then if that person is targeted or they have a complaint on that particular person, then your farm could easily be investigated also, because you're part of that itinerary that farm where contractor is using, and he's working on your farm. So those are some of the things that can trigger you for an investigation.
I'm really glad that you brought that up about the farm labor contractors. I feel like that's a common misconception. I hire a farm labor contractor, they're liable, I'm not. When in fact, not only are you still liable, but let's say the farm labor contractor has a violation for another farm, it's opening the door essentially for your farm to get flagged. But Warren, what happens when you get flagged as an owner, as a farmer?
Well, I would say first, of course, they're going to notify me when I was working at, hey, we got this complaint. We need somebody to look into this, and we're going to assign an investigator to do that particular case. Me personally, and this is just how I did it personally, I had a lot of resources that I would look through and take advantage of before I actually came to your farm. And say like the accident that I mentioned before, we would have I could go get a copy of the police report, GSP report, Sheriff Department might interview even the officers who were on scene, and they're going to try to give me that information as far as what's on your farm. So just a lot of research that goes into doing these investigations. It's not that somebody's just showing up at your farm and trying to start doing something. I did a lot of research before I came out to your farm. I checked social media for you to see if you had a signature on a footprint, I would say, on social media to see if so when I went to the farm, if the farmer is doing the social media video or such, that I would know who I was talking to when I showed up at the farm. Because sometimes you show up and the person I need to see, I'm talking to, might say they're not there, but it's actually the person I'm talking to. So you have that part of it. I'm going to check the state of I usually do state of Georgia's corporate record and look your business up in the corporate record to see who are the officers of the business. Because there may be other folks that we need to get in contact with. Check prior history. If you ever been investigated with wage and hour, you had history. The database had you full of history. And if personally, if I had gone to your farm in the 20 years, I know you had history because I would have done an investigation on your particular establishment. So I knew you had history there. I'm going to check if you're a farm labor contractor. We're going to check with our sister office in California to see if your licenses and certifications are correct and in order, to make sure that you are in compliance when you're coming out to do those kind of things. Let's see what else I would do. Of course, read a prior report as far as with your history on it to see if you had other violations or the violations that you did have. If we go back to the location again, and you still have those same types of violations, then that could be an issue also for even a higher civil money penalty because you didn't fix what needed to be fixed before. One thing you have to remember is the investigator's here to find something wrong. So there's ways of trying to alleviate that. As I mentioned before, we can help you with that as far as with doing a mock audit with the people I work with. FieldClock has great portions of their platform that you can use. It's going to help you out with those kind of situations.
Warren, I was really surprised throughout our conversations just how many tools the Department of Labor has at their disposal, from social media and just access to public records, and thank you for talking about FieldClock as well, because that's really where we're coming from is, the deck is stacked against farmers and they're bogged down with hours and hours worth of paperwork and compliance. And FieldClock really is here to be able to help level that playing field, and as are you and your services. Actually, I'd love to do story time if you can. What would you say is the worst case scenario you've seen as far as like record storage?
Well, I went to one place and all they had was their records in a box, like you put, well, I would say a watermelon box. Or any kind of large cardboard box. And they just kind of said, hey, the records are in there. Take whatever records you need. And it was, I'm going to say 5-10 years worth of records just thrown into this particular box. And that's not going to be a good day for the employer, because if something is missing, then you could stand a chance of being fined for not having payroll records. Not having things in a proper order that you can provide to the investigator and go from there. So you really, I talk a lot about the records because as from my experience, your records kind of tell the story for your business. If you have good documentation, good records, things seem to be in order. I don't want to hear that they were in a fire or they were in a shed, they got rained on or something like that. It just helps as far as making sure that you're organized. If I can come in when I was working and see that your operation looks organized, then something probably is organized. If it looks to be a kind of disarray, a little bit sloppy, then some things might be missing. Some things might be out out of order as far as that goes. So that's one thing too, and I always reiterate it as far as working with FieldClock. You just make sure your records are in order, all your time. Remember, your whole thing revolves around the time that workers are working, and you just want to make sure that you have your records taken care of. And that was probably the worst, Ashley. Definitely seen worse. Well, I'll say worse, or others where the days, and I always say, stop the days of using a spiral notebook where you just flip the pages every day and keep your time and all that kind of, those days are over if you're going to use H-2A. That's just going to get you in a bind. And because you have to have a lot more accurate records to be ready if somebody does come to your door. And it's not just wage and hour. There are other agencies that also check for labor and documentation for what the workers worked at and things as such. So it's kind of an all around thing to make sure that you're in compliance.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, from this example, you have an entire bin filled with records. And if we take your example of the multiplier effect, you are now going through a bin of records and who knows what's in there. You know, where from what I understand, if wage and hour comes out, you want to keep them on track and you want to only give them what they're asking for and really not open the door. You gave an example when we were talking the other day about not keeping your I-9s with your employee files, because again, that's the multiplier effect and it opens the door for wage and hour to be able to see other things and investigate further. So absolutely, easy access to your records is absolutely essential.
And you mentioned earlier, Warren, the investigator's job is to find violations. So the minute you're on the scene, you're digging and you're looking. And farmers don't have a lot of time to sit there and direct you where you need to go. So if they're trying to sift through a bin of records, wouldn't it be much easier if you just had all of these things digitized? And if they're looking for a specific date and time and employee, you can pull that up in minutes as opposed to hours, because I'm assuming you don't really give them a lot of notice before you show up. And it's not like they're going to have time to prepare these things for you. They need to have them ready on hand.
That's correct. No, we wouldn't. You don't get any notice. It's a walk-in basis, and to me, I try to be very respectful to the farming community when I was doing investigation, and that is to show up at your establishment and present myself to you with identification to let you know that I'm there to do the investigation and what I was there to do the investigation for. Did I have to do that? Not at all. I could just go to your fields. I could just go to your housing and just start talking to people, start looking around your housing. And again, I've done that years before. Now things have progressed. Everything is a little bit different now. All your information, your footprint is on the internet. So I don't have to get in my vehicle and ride around South Georgia for all day just to try to find people who are working in the fields. Your information, particularly H-2A, your information is on seasonal jobs, and you can just look in there. You can put a zip code in and say, hey, I need 20 miles from around this zip code, and we go and see everybody in that particular zip code. And that's just how easy it was to take care of those kind of things. So you really, like you said, just make sure you have your record, and digitizing it is very good because that way you can also provide the records timely. You can get the information to somebody. You're not dealing with a lot of paper, and you can get the information to me when I was working and just, send it to me and take care of that kind of situation. Please understand that, like I said, the investigator doesn't have to come to you to start the investigation. Respectfully, they should. Anybody I work with, I try to let sure that they know, hey, respectfully, go and see the person. Let them know you're here to do whatever. I know that's very aggravating to anybody to show up and say you're coming to check the field, and next thing you know, you see 3 or 4 investigators in your field, that just sets somebody off, and that can put, change things into a bad situation. So no, the investigator doesn't have to do that, but I prefer that I did go do that because I just want to make sure I have respect for the person who's doing that particular work.
And given your history in the field, what are some of the common mistakes that you saw when you show up?
Mainly in the field is not having proper field sanitation and not having prescribed toilets or water and so forth in the fields with everybody. People not actually knowing what's going on with your business operation. I think if you are within the management of the business, you should have some type of knowledge of what's happening within the business. Um, it was, I would think if you make sure that you know exactly what's happening day to day, not have to be hour to hour, but day to day, what's going on with your particular business, what you might be harvesting, what's going on at that particular time. Let's see, problems. Like I said, water, no toilets. People, staff not knowing who or what they're going to do or who's involved with certain things. I think I made a list as far as in the best practices, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, as far as who you might want to have in your team to make sure everybody's aware of what's going on.
That one's a big one. And Ashley,
Yeah,
I kind of want you to talk about what FieldClock provides when you're talking about who is showing up that particular day to work on that particular job to get paid a specific fee. If you're looking at pen and paper to calculate that, you're going to get into some pretty deep issues quickly if you're trying to juggle all of those balls at once. So I guess just talk a little bit about the advantages that you see from digitization.
Yeah, absolutely. Instant access to your information. Whether you're on their app or if you're in fieldclock.com, you're able to see exactly where your employees are and what they're doing. More than that, whatever you're paying your employees, whether it's salary, straight time, piecework, we have wage programs that help you stay and remain in compliance. So it doesn't matter whether your employees are switching from an hourly job to a piecework job, their pay is going to be within compliance for their H-2A contract, state regulations, you name it. So this way it takes the thought out of it, and it's really easy to share that information to wage and hour when they come out immediately. And also separate that information so you're not oversharing. You can simply show them Ashley's information or Nico's information or everyone under that specific contract rather than opening the door to the rest of your operation.
Absolutely. And it's taking that gut feeling out of the things that you do on your farm every day and replacing it with hard data. I know, Warren, we spoke a couple of days ago, and you mentioned when we talk about people issuing complaints, you mentioned there was a farmer that tried to fire a couple of workers because they thought that they were doing slow production. Talk about that process a little bit when a farmer is making a decision because they feel a certain way as opposed to being able to actually prove it.
right. Yeah. So going back to our previous conversation we had about me researching, I'm always looking at your job order. I read the entire job order to see exactly what's happening within your job order. And everybody's job order has production standards. So there are other standards also involved with how much you can lift and so forth. So on this one, the complaint was that the workers, the U.S. workers, were complaining that they weren't getting enough work, and the H-2A workers were getting more work than them to do. And I guess the feeling was that the U.S. workers weren't high enough in production to do such. So my partner and I, we just took some raw data, basically, thank God for Excel, and interviewed some workers. And we're kind of beyond Excel now. That's why we got FieldClock. So we took the data, we interviewed the workers, and you find out what the baseline is as far as what the production is. And they were doing piece rate type work. So you kind of find out where the baseline is with the production. Once we put in the data for about a month, what we actually found out based on that particular information was that the H-2A workers were actually underperforming the U.S. workers. So that can start a ball rolling as far as, is this discrimination going on here with the American worker? And that's not something you want to be involved with as a farmer when you're discriminating against the U.S. worker. Those fines are extremely high. 22,000, I think it is now, for those kind of fines. So you just don't want to discriminate against the U.S. worker. If there's a performance issue, then you could probably do some type of remedial type action if you have something in place to increase somebody's production. Maybe the person is learning how to do that. That's not the first time they've done it. They did it before, but it's just something that they have to get repetitive and try to do those kind of things. So you just want to be very careful. And I'm sure just from knowing everybody here at FieldClock that you can track that data within the system and find out if somebody's performing below a certain standard if you have a baseline, and you can make a correction to that for their production just to make sure, because the person might just have something that might be bothering them that day. They might have got a bad phone call. It might, something, they might be a little sick, just try to find out something that's going on with that.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a great point, both Warren and Nico. Taking the feelings out of farming. A lot of times, you have a feeling about your workers' performance, but you don't actually know, or you have a feeling about a specific crop, but it's really hard to pull all of that information together. But when you have a system in place, when you have the right tools in place to be able to actually show what their productivity is, you're able then to create a baseline or expectations. And we all know that the cost of labor is not going anywhere. It's the most expensive it's ever been, and as Nico mentioned earlier, it's increasing about 6% every year. And having a tool like FieldClock really allows you to take the feelings out and know exactly how well your crops are doing, how well your employees are performing. And it's easy, instant access. You don't have to wait until the end of the year when you're handling all of your paperwork. You can see it week to week, make modifications to your employees' productions. You can actually train with them, which I believe is one of the H-2A required steps before you're able to terminate someone as well. So you're able to do this easily within FieldClock, and you should be doing this because you should be making your decisions based on actual information and data rather than feelings.
Absolutely. And we've talked about it's not really a question of if, but when wage and hours shows up at your door. So we talked about some of the consequences that you could face. We've talked a little bit about the process that you're going to undergo. Let's talk about best practices. So Warren, I bet a lot of the farmers here that are on this call today are just wondering, all right, well, what can I do, either whether before or during an investigation, to really shore up my business?
Sure. I made a long list, but kind of probably helps if you know the actual process of the investigation. So somebody's going to show up, basically. That's not including the work that I've done prior to coming to see you. So somebody's going to come to your farm. They're going to notify you that you're under investigation for compliance with H-2A, NISPA, Fair Labor Standards Act, Child Labor, OSHA, right? Then you're going to have a meeting with the management. And that's one of my points of interest here as far as with the best practice. You need to have what I call an audit team, and you need to have some type of team in place and notify them when an audit's about to happen, because certain people will be brought into the meeting with the investigator, and you have what's called an initial conference. Mine lasted a couple hours, so you have to be prepared to sit down with me, and because I had 7-8 pages of questions I want to ask you. So yes, you might get an appointment letter from the investigator and it's got questions and information. Well, I still have at least 3 or 4 more pages of those questions that's not on that letter. So you want to go through that. So one thing to do is if you want to, please conduct your own audit. That's why I mentioned earlier for our services that I do. Mock audits help you get through that particular situation so you're ready all the time for if somebody comes to inspect your housing and your vehicles, and I say a minimum of twice a week. And I believe in FieldClock there's a way you can assign people duties, and you can assign certain people to do those particular duties and report back to you and say something was found. That way you can correct problems before the problem gets out of control, and you can do those things. Let's see. I got develop assigned roles to audit team responsibilities, establish a notification process for staff when an audit is announced, and also have what I have on my list is called a first call. Who are you going to call when the investigator shows up at your office? Do you have an attorney that you use? well, contact your attorney so you can make sure you get legal guidance on what you need to do. That way you can have that person on call. I work with a great attorney that can do those kind of things for you, just to make sure you're doing what you need to do. One thing is you have to be very careful, minimize what you say, and don't say too much. Um, if I showed up in the field and you have a field supervisor, then that supervisor needs to be trained to know who to call when the wage and hour investigator shows up, and not sitting out there talking and giving up, as we all might say, spilling the tea on the business. So you just don't want to do that kind of thing as far as that goes. One thing also very important, and it's happened to me a couple times. I've had the police called on me, sheriff departments, all kinds of things. Please try not to be, and I know it's hard, try not to be hostile to the investigator. This is, like I said, respect goes both ways. Try to go that way. Now, if the investigator is not acting appropriately and disrespectful, then contact their manager. Simple as that. You know, that's not supposed to happen. Things can move a lot easier as far as that goes. Professional as much as you can. They need to be professional also. Introduce the investigator to the staff that you're going to be working with them on. If you do a tour, because I used to do tour of the housing, and I might do a tour of the break area, the whole facility. So have somebody with the investigator, because I might be taking pictures, I might be taking notes. Then somebody needs to do that. Sometimes I would go to establishment and there's a big note right above the time clock. If you don't clock in, you're not going to get paid. Click. That's not something you want to have on your time clock. That's not going to work. Especially from there on a complaint where the workers say they're not getting paid. That's not one of those things. Let's see, schedules for interviews, so your work is not interrupted on your farm. Never admit to any kind of violations. That's funny. Only provide the documents that you're supposed to provide. Okay, and this is where, of course, we have FieldClock to help with that. Complete the training with your workers. Make sure all your reimbursements are done properly. It's just me, and it's just suggestion that I have. If you're doing like the inbound transportation reimbursement, some people put it on the same paycheck. My suggestion is to put that on a separate payroll, because the worker's going to be asked, did they get their money for any kind of reimbursements that they had? And that way that person can hopefully speak to the point of that they did get a check. The meeting is a three-pronged investigation process. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to interview the workers. I'm going to check your payroll records. If you got a check for all three, then more than likely you're okay. If one of those checks isn't correct, then there's a problem there, and that's going to set off a red flag. Make sure the workers are working in the job duties that are on the job order, so you won't have any kind of misclassifications. Let's see, Nico.
Well, I'm glad you brought that part up, because that's a big one there. When you're talking about what you worked versus what you were offered and what you're actually showing on the pay stub. And I guess, Ashley, talk a little bit about how FieldClock addresses some of those classification issues.
Absolutely. So we would consider those to be tasks that can be associated to job codes as well. So what we do is we make it really easy for you to take the tasks that are listed on your contract and utilize them in the system, so that when your employees are clocking into work, they can clock into a task, and it's just going to show consistency between the work they're actually doing and what's on the contract. And additionally, if they're moving from task to task, we're going to break down their day and show Ashley was working 4 hours at this task, 5 hours at that task, and we'll break down their tasks. And we also provide compliance wage statements that will break down your employees week or 2 weeks, whatever frequency you're paying them, and it'll show where they were working, how many hours they worked there, how many hours they were offered, and again, the variation between tasks as well as the location, which is all part of that H-2A compliance.
Yeah, and that goes back to just proactivity. You know, if you're keeping your employees in the know about what you're going to be paying them and it lines up with what they've been offered, then you're not going to have a red flag. And as Warren mentioned before, the minute you get that single complaint, the magnifying glass is on your business and the layers start being peeled back. So when we're talking about best practices and things that you can do, I think transparency is probably one of the biggest proactive steps you can take with your employees, whether it's notifying them of posters, notifying them of when their break time is, making sure that they have access to their own records as well. I know here at FieldClock, we have the employee portal. At any given time, an employee in the field can look on their phone in real time and see, okay, where am I at this week? It's only Wednesday. I don't get paid until Friday. Where am I at with my productivity and my pay? And if things look off, they can go to their crew boss that day and they can work it out. It might be just a simple mistake, as opposed to getting a paycheck on Friday and saying, wait, no, this is off by X number of hours. Now the employee's upset and they want to start talking to people about it. And Warren, also you mentioned, minimize what you say. It's not always vocally. If you have, as you mentioned before, a watermelon-sized box full of records, that investigator's looking at everything under the sun when maybe they only need to look at one or two employees. So when you have a system like FieldClock and they need to see a specific record for a specific employee, you can show them detailed reports just in that very narrow focus, as opposed to lifting up the veil of the entire business and leaving yourself open to potential issues. So I want to be mindful of our time here. Let's get to a little bit of Q&A for folks. And while we're answering questions, I do want to put some information up here for folks. If you do have more detailed questions, I'm just going to share my screen there. Please feel free to reach out either to Ashley, ashley@fieldclock.com, or directly to Warren, WLWilliams6684 @gmail.com. And you can absolutely get into a much more in-depth questions. But we have a pretty active panel here, or audience, I should say. I'm just going to go down the list as they came in. We'll start off with Pepe. So Pepe is asking, once an audit has been triggered, do they also delve into the local workforce, or can they only be specific to H-2A workers?
I'm guessing that Pepe is meaning the U.S. workers that may be employed with
Yep.
the contract also. So the investigation is going to encompass the entire job order, which we're going to ask. I'd ask, how many U.S. workers do you have working on the contract and what are they doing? So we're going to look at those workers. We're going to make sure those workers understand that everybody's going to be interviewed. I like to take a opportunity to interview some of the U.S. workers and some of the H-2A workers to make sure that we are covering across the board, to make sure that certain things were done prior to the worker coming. How did they get here? Did they have expenses? Did they get reimbursed? Those kind of things, just to make sure that I hate to say checking the box, but to make sure that the process was followed so that the person didn't violate any laws.
Follow-up question from Pepe here. He says, we have two farms in two states, Washington and Oregon, and the wages are different for piece rate in both of those states. So how do you make that clear in the H-2A contract so that workers don't think that they're in violation?
Since it's not, of course, there's no agent on here, but what we're going to do is look and see, because of course, with the help of FieldClock, if they're using FieldClock, you're going to be geo-fenced, so you're going to know where you were working, in which particular state you're working in, and what job you were doing. And on your wage statement, it should show, like some of the ones I've seen here, somebody might work in Georgia, they might go work in Florida. So it might say Georgia, a little small GA behind that time, a little FL for Florida. And then that person will know, I work this state for those amount of hours, and I work the other state for a certain amount of other hours. So all that information is given to the worker, and they know that they are receiving the correct pay for the state they particularly worked in.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think that all goes back again to transparency. If you have everything laid out and itemized on a sheet,
Right.
Ashley mentioned that we do have a gross wage statement that we attach to each pay stub. They'll see exactly where they were, at what time, at which rate they were being paid.
Right. And you get a question like that from a worker, that might be kind of a red flag for a wage job investigator, because that information should be spelled out in the job order as far as that goes. So if you ask the person, did you get a copy of the job order, and did you see that information in there, you have to weigh that out depending on what the person's answer is to that particular question. So that could also be one of those things you want to make sure in your notification or your contract that's given out to the worker.
Yep. Callie's asking a good question here. So they're saying, can you inform us of timetables for correction for different violations? How is that established? And what are the timetables for some of the other agencies? So I guess, how long do they give you to correct some of these timetables or correct some of these violations?
Well, if you mainly looking at housing, we can start with housing first. Sometimes there's what we would call a 10-day grace period for you to get all your corrections done. If something was, something was noted to you that was wrong with the housing that you need to get corrected. That's vehicles also. That could also be with your payroll, because you have to make a good faith effort to try to comply with the law. So you do have time. Housing for sure, I know it's 10 days. Sometimes your payroll, some of that stuff can be corrected in a day or a couple of days or something like that. If you get a penalty for those violations, then in your rebuttal to the fine, you want to show how you corrected the problem that was a cited violation, and that can help you as far as hopefully reducing your penalty in that particular violation for so forth. So 10 days for the housing. Does that mean you're not going to be written up for the housing? No, it doesn't. But that still means that you put a good faith effort into coming to compliance.
And we had a kind of a follow-up question in chat. If the violation can be remedied right there on the spot, will the investigator allow for that immediate correction?
In my position as a senior, I could, but that doesn't mean you're not going to be written up for it. That was my decision. That was my decision at the time at that particular place to have that kind of situation be taken care of. And I give it really quick, and I know we kind of slow with the time. I had a guy that had a bus. The bus was in bad shape. I told him, look, by the time I get back here tomorrow, I need that bus fixed. I need the tires fixed. I need the windows fixed. I need everything taken care of. Before I left that day, they were already taking care of some of that kind of things on the vehicle. So I have a choice. I can write them up and get the bus fixed, or I can get that bus fixed and I can move on to the next thing. That was my position. I was able to make that kind of decision where I was working, being a senior so-called investigator, do that. Because long run, we're looking at safety and health of the worker. I don't want to say, oh, your tire was about, and 3 months later you find out about it, and that bus is going back and forth on the road. That doesn't do me any good, especially if that bus gets in an accident. And I've been on that farm, so-called, reviewing those kind of violations.
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to transparency, transparency, transparency. People need to know exactly what it is that they're doing at all times. And you need to be able to prove what they're doing at all times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There was one question here about food safety. I don't think we're going to get into that one. I highly encourage you to reach out to Warren on that one. Let's see. Also from Pepe here, so he's saying, in the scenario where our H-2A workforce is already there on site, if they're mandated to offer employment to U.S. workers, are they still obligated to hire them, even though, the H-2A workers are still at the farm?
So that's going to run into your job hiring obligation, your recruitment requirements for American workers up to the 50% mark of the job order. So you got options there. You can, if the person is willing, able, and ready to work, qualified to work, that employee should be hired. The U.S. worker should be hired. Now, does that mean you have to get rid of your H-2A worker? It doesn't. You got an option to either send that person home, keep both people, and move forward. You do have an option there. Nobody's saying you have to get rid of your H-2A worker, and that's at the 50% mark. After the 50% mark, there is no requirement, but other than the law right now, as it stands at 50%, if you're within that time frame, say this is what, July, your contract started in June, now you're in July, you still have to make every effort to try to hire American workers that apply for the job. And real quick, Nico, I say on that, please, 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 if the number one category on a violation sheet for H-2A is U.S. worker violations. So you have to make sure you do everything you can within your power as far as positive recruitment. And please also check your referrals. If it's a walk-up person, you might have emails, you may get stuff from the SWA. Please make sure that somebody's checking those referrals to make sure you're covering yourself on that. You don't want to be in a situation where we had workers that were qualified, but the employer never reached out to these individuals.
Mike actually had a good question. It could be a long-winded one, but he's asking what documentation absolutely needs to be kept on file and for how long?
All records should be kept for 3 years.
3 years.
I've been in some meetings, some people might say keep them 10 years. It just depends. That's coming from attorneys that I hear talking as far as lawsuits and people going back further as far as that goes. 3 years for most of your records for examination. And like I said, in the service that we offer, we try to make sure those records are compliant for you within that particular time frame. And which documents? Mainly your payroll.
That's the long-winded part.
Yeah, that's the long-winded part as far as your payroll. That's why digitization is so great, is that you can keep more stuff on a record than you have to keep in a file box as far as papers go. So 3 years is a good place to start. If you want to keep them longer than that, that's fine. But I think you can store a lot more digital now than you could if you just want to have boxes and boxes. And we don't want a situation like we had with the 10 years of papers in the watermelon box. That's not good. We don't want to do that. So just organize them, keep them year to year, and try to have it that way.
And Ashley, does FieldClock delete records after a certain amount of time, or are they just always there?
No, they're there.
Everything is on hand, ready to go. A final question here. What is, and this is also maybe subjective here, Mike's asking, what's the ideal timeline for preparing for an H-2A audit? Not that you're going to get noticed though, Mike.
No, you won't be, but like I said, it's always and I think we talked about this the other day, is like somebody told me, I'd rather have something and not need it than need something and not have it. And having it is having a transparency, having a way to perform audits within your business. So you're always prepared. The old Boy Scout saying, be prepared. Just make sure you have your things in place so you can be ready for somebody to walk in the door. Like I said, nobody wants to go to sleep at night thinking that wage an hour, the boogeyman is coming to get you. So please, please, please just try to make sure that if you reach out to us, we can help you with that. And just to give you peace of mind that you have your documentation and everything's taken care of for you. I was told when I started doing consulting that I had switched to the dark side. So it's just here to help, but I know farmers need help. And I know the small farmer really, really, really needs help. You might be wearing 10, 15 hats. So, and you have other agencies coming to see you. I know you have other types of inspections of people coming. So, just let us help you out best we can.
Love it. I think that's a perfect statement to end on. And you don't know when these audits or investigations are going to come, but as we mentioned before, they can come from anywhere at any time. One final question here from, it says anonymous, so they didn't want to give their name. They're asking, Warren, what would you consider a production standard violation? Would one worker working slower than other workers on a crew with the same experience be a good measure? Or are there production standards that wage and hour is looking for, I guess is a better way to put it.
I see them in the job orders, and if that worker is working slower, let's try to take a little time to find out what's going on with that worker. Like I said, they might have had a bad day, they might have got a bad phone call, they might be sick, they could be injured. But if it's consistency, if it's consistent going like that, then we want to check and see exactly what's going on with that worker. And they might have a production issue. As I said before, and I'll try to be quick with it, is that when I look at a production standard, just because somebody says they work in agriculture does not mean that they work in the particular type of agriculture that you have on your farm. They might have drove a tractor and say that's agriculture experience. Yes, that's correct. but now you have them doing some type of hand harvesting work. What we did find is not everybody knows how to pick apples, like somebody who's used to picking apples. So just because you did some other type of work may not be your production standard to meet, and that person might need extra training to get them up to the standard to see exactly what's going on.
Yeah, and what I like, I love that you asked this question, because FieldClock makes it really easy for you to, if you don't have standards established, establish them. So taking and creating a baseline, and from there, holding your employees accountable to those standards. And you're going to not only be able to pay them appropriately, so regardless of their speed, we make making those minimum wage adjustments really easy. But you'll also be able to see quickly, visually, their cadence of picking. And then if they're moving slow, you'll be able to see, is this a systemic issue? Is this something maybe they've had an off day? Let's say they've injured themselves. Great. Using our app, you can take a picture, you can document that. If it's more than that, you can also train them, document their training to show that you're trying to mediate the situation. So again, all of these things are really good standards and really good practices, especially, you know, like I was saying earlier, is your cost of labor is really high. You want to make sure that you're maximizing your existing workforce. And if that means, you know, that maybe I ask Nico to come back next year and I don't ask Ashley to come back next year, you're able to do that, and to do that with all of the data backing and supporting your decision.
Yep. Real quick, Nico, as far as to follow what Ashley was saying, when you're checking that person's production and so forth, if that individual winds up getting terminated, you still want to have some type of documentation showing why you terminated that person. You just don't want to say, "Oh, I just got rid of them because they were not up to speed," as far as that goes. You just want to have some type of documentation to show what steps you took to try to keep the person, basically. If it's at a point where you just can't do anything about it, then you have to handle that situation as need be. Now, what I would caution you as far as that is just doing something like that, but also reach out to some legal counsel and find out how, what's the best practice as far as trying to do that. But I would always say have some type of training program or something to make sure that you're covered and it's not looked at as you just terminated somebody and got rid of them. Because that's not, it could show something different and it could go a different way.
Yeah, and going back to Ashley's example, within a system like FieldClock, you're also able to provide notes on each of the specific jobs, including visuals like photos as well. So if you have a worker that might be really fast, but the fruit is damaged consistently, you can make note of that, and you can make note of anything over a series of time. And when it comes time to either reprimand or terminate, you have this body of evidence in front of you. It's not, again, it's not a gut feeling. This is hard evidence that you're presenting either to them or to the investigator. Well, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We did go a little bit over. I appreciate everyone staying on and engaging with questions as well. Again, I'm going to share my screen. Make sure I've got the right one, just so that the contact information is up. And if you do have a more in-depth question for Warren or for Ashley, please reach out. I'm also going to send out a copy of this recording, and I'll include their contact information as well. And honestly, I think, Warren, we could probably spend another hour, if not more, diving into some of these specifics. I'd love to have you back on again. And
Sure.
folks, please feel free to reach out to us if there's a topic that you feel we could cover in depth in a future session. Reach out to us and we're happy to do so. But I want to take the time to thank Ashley Reese for joining us today, and special thank you to Warren Williams and to everyone that showed up with your engaged questions. We like to put sessions like this together to just keep people in the know. These are topics that are very impactful to every organization that we work with, and we want to make sure that the ad community has as many resources as possible. As Ashley mentioned earlier, Wage and Hour has the entire government behind them with resources staffed and budgeted to make sure that they find violations. So we want to make sure that you, the farmers, have just as many resources in your belt to make sure that you can prove exactly what it is that you're doing. We know a lot of farmers out there are doing the right thing, And we want to make sure that you can prove it and that you can prove it quickly. And that's really what we're here to provide. So thank you to everyone for joining in. We look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.